So welcome to this podcast, Gary.
Thanks, Phil.
So this is a new podcast, and you are first out. It'll be called the Journeys of Scholars, and this conversation is going to be about the trajectories, macro, micro strategies, habits, and various advice that top scholars in academia could give to people around them, people that are also top performers that we can learn from each other. So this conversation will be about the topics that are sort of unusual to discuss in corridors. We usually talk about papers, ideas, and things around those things. But there are the meta life of scholars that this podcast is going to be about. It's going to be the things that are sort of encapsulating the journeys of scholars. So Gary, you are the Weatherhead University Professor at Harvard University. You're also the director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard. Gary, you and your group are applying various empirical methods in many sort of domains of social research. And you have, among other things, honorary positions and fellowships in many different academies, won several prizes. I'm not going to name them all. And awarded for his work in various commitments to science in general. So, Gary, you might not remember this, but we first met in 2018, beginning of 2018. So I had just flew into Sweden for my postdoc at the Center for Population Development Studies at Harvard. It's going to be like a 2-year trip, and I thought, what other way would be the better way of starting by auditing some classes. And I've always been fascinated by causal inference, statistics, and how to apply it to various social science topics. So I sent you an email. I landed a Friday, and it was a Saturday, and I sent you an email, and I thought the class is going to start on Monday, so I thought this is going to be probably I'm not going to get an answer. He's super busy. And so it took you about an hour or two, and then you replied. It just went like this. And this is sort
of sorry for making you wait so long.
No problems. But it really just went like this. And this is something that has been a puzzle for me, at least, to how someone who is involved in so many different things at the university, but also with various companies. And how do you, but you seem to be so approachable. You seem to be very generous with your time as well. So just as a, initial sort of reflection, how does that fit into the life of Gary King?
Well, we all do electronic communications, and if I'm going to respond to you, I might as well respond now. I mean, this is when you got it. I mean, if I was out mountain biking, it might have taken a little longer. But I imagine it was important. That's why you sent me the note, and getting a response is probably a good idea. Plus, also class was Monday, right? So.
Well, that strikes me something that comes back a lot to you. I mean, we've been in conversation in various topics, and also students contact you, and I mean, but there are a lot of demands, right? In a person like Gary King, the persona of Gary King, the demands must be quite high still. And replying to me means that you probably are replying to like 50 others per hour or something like that.
I mean, you're reminding me of a conversation I had with, I sat down in a seminar, and there was an undergraduate sitting next to me, and he very gingerly, with a shaking voice, said, you responded to an email of mine. And I said, yeah, well, like, okay, well, what's the story? He said, well, professors don't do that. I said, well, okay, well, I apologize. He said, no, really, it just doesn't happen. And actually, that's a little ridiculous, right? I mean, it doesn't take very long. It's not really that big a deal. It's important. And when I was growing up, I wasn't Gary King. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right. And other people, if they want to know something, you respond. What's the big deal? So,
right.
I might not have time to spend a week with everybody, but a 2-second email, and I'm not inviting random emails from everybody. But if you have some reason to talk to me, then I'd be happy to talk to you.
Fair enough. Well, it is a balancing act. I mean, you hear a lot within career advice is that you have to be able to say no to things, right? So you need to be able to say no, and probably say no to 99 of different invitations of 100, and you should select the one, that is really worth pursuing. And that gives a mode, in academia at least, and that's sort of how I've been taught, is that you have to say no. But this really doesn't, fit into the.
So you're raising an economic point. So if you have an inadequate supply of some good, then what happens if there's more demand, right? In the economy, what happens is prices go up, right? So if you're a professor or a teaching fellow, or whatever it is, and people are making too many demands on your time, so option one is you can raise your prices, but that's not legal. So you're going to lose your job. Doesn't seem like a possibility.
And per email.
Yeah, it's just not enough. It's like they don't offer us that option. Even if we wanted it, we might not take it. What's the other thing? If you can't raise prices to deal with it, well, you ration, which is what you're asking, right? And how do faculty ration? Well, I mean, if you think about it, like how do you convey to people that you shouldn't contact me because I don't have enough time? You basically be rude, or you limit all of your working hours at which you're accessible to office hours. I don't have office hours. I don't really like office hours because I really want to talk to people. And my research, which is that's what most faculty, that's what gets us up in the morning. That's what we're really working to do. Is my research, or at least the way that I do it, it's integrated with my teaching and my contacts with colleagues. And so I don't really want to cut off all access with everybody and narrow it down to one really boring and very busy hour.
Right.
Plus also there's plenty of times during the day when you just can't focus on proving the theorem or writing something or whatever it is. And then what a great time to respond to an email or have a call.
So basically, do you have a principle for how to operate in terms of? I mean, now if we think about this in a grander scale of invitation to papers, projects, and things like that, do you have a specific principle or an algorithm that you sort of mentally go through to evaluate whether this is sort of a yes or a no type of engagement?
I mean, if you had a question for me that was meaningful, that mattered, at least that's how we recall it in this conversation.
Right.
And you wanted to know about class on Monday. So what a great reason. If it's I just want to talk, then it doesn't work. And frankly, you can look on my website and there's a few bits of guidance about things like that. Like if you want to come to our graduate program, and you just want to talk about it, it's not feasible. We usually get 800 applications, and it's just like I can't do that. Like I would be happy to, but it's just not feasible. Yeah. But there's other things that that are. So if it's possible, I'm in. So.
Fantastic. So it's basically a balancing act, and this sort of brings me to the first sort of general topic of time management of top performing scholars and collaboration in general. I mean, we do have to sort of protect our mental space so that we can do deep work versus engaging in various other activities that are necessary, but still aren't as deep. But we still need to do them. So and this act is obviously also embedded in a broader life, right? I mean, with family relationships and hobbies and friends and so on. So just, I mean, walk us through a little bit, the bigger picture of how you think about these relationships.
So graduate students ask me this, and this is what I tell them. I say it's like a point system. Everybody thinks that they are inefficient with respect to time, and we could all optimize a little more. And graduate students in particular, they're triaging, right? They're trying to figure out how to take my limited time and use it as best as possible.
Right.
And I say, here's a point system. Okay. So you come to work, you work all day, 0 points. Okay. You come to work and you work an incredible amount of time and you stay up late and you're really focused and you're not doing anything else. And you really work on that paper. 0 points. That's what you do. That's the whole point. Okay. But if you finish a paper or finish a draft of a paper and put it on your website and send it to people so that you're then waiting for somebody else, then you get a point. Okay. Or you submit it to the journal, you get a point.
Right.
If it gets accepted, that's good. I mean, I don't know whether you get a point for that. It's not really the point, right? Because at some point, if you pursue it relentlessly, all the papers will be published. That's not that big a deal. The point is whether my point is whether you're putting your time in an effective way, and the things that matter are finishing things, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of crazy things that go on. So many people sign up to give a paper at a conference. They haven't written the paper. They have an idea for what the paper might be. In the social sciences, often all you have to do is have a title and an abstract. In some fields, you have to have finished the paper. What I tell my students is finish the paper first. If you don't have if the paper's not done, then don't propose it. Now, the reason people propose papers that are unfinished, sometimes it's because they know very well they're going to finish it, but many times it's to convince themselves to write the paper. Exactly. It's to tie your hands.
Exactly.
But that's an utter mistake, because then you're going to show up. Then what you're going to do, because everybody in this position was a good student, otherwise they wouldn't be in this position, right? So what they do is they finish. They meet the deadline they set for themselves, and they fall across the finish line with a draft of a paper. That draft is not anywhere near as good as the final version, nowhere near. So they show up at a conference with an unfinished paper, basically. And you know what? If you write a paper and it's a really good paper and it gets in the top journal in the field, it's possible that basically the only person that would have read it is you. But if you show up at a conference and there's 20 people in the audience and you give a presentation, 20 people will at least have some idea what your work is about. Right. So that's a valuable part of what we do. What we do is I think of it as the creation, preservation, and distribution of knowledge. Right. And so often conferences, seeing people in person or virtually, as the case may be, is more valuable than writing it up. I mean, they go together. Obviously, you need to do one to make the other useful. Yeah. But I just think people devalue it so much that they wind up giving lousy conference presentations about lousy papers that will eventually be really great papers. So why not just finish the great paper, then propose it, and you might even fine tune it on the way. Right. But you remember high school when you had to write something up and you didn't want to write it up, and you had this uncomfortable feeling, and it was just terrible. Like, if you've actually gone into academia, then you don't want to do that, right? So why do that? I mean, if that's the way you motivate yourself, then okay, but it's not efficient.
I was going to say that because it feels like at least some portion of the collaborators I work with is that they want that deadline to tie themselves to finish certain things. I mean, I don't know the whole process behind that. Whether it's sort of a mental game or it's they want a network. Or it's an act of actually pursuing excellence through iteration, through going to a conference, even if it's imperfect. I present it, it gets better, and so on and so forth. But how do you respond to those people that I mean, at least for those sort of 0 point type of action, right? They would still tie themselves to go into conference, and it will take time from actual work, you might say, or family time, and so on.
Well, we're getting into co-authors. And co-authors are bundles. They come with who they are. And if that's what they need, then if that's the way if that's what it takes for you to motivate them, or for them to be motivated, or for them to do their best work, then you work with that. You deal with it.
Right. So, and so actually that brings me to another topic, which is the question of sort of collaboration in general, right? So it's collaboration that requires time, but it's also sort of overlapping with my next topic for you, which is leadership. And so if we think about collaboration a little bit more, which is this sort of act of giving and taking, and also sort of optimizing for both productivity, but also creativity. So when it comes to exactly these points that we're talking about, I mean, how do you navigate that at a personal level from your perspective? Because it's hard to change individuals. You can get them recommendations, obviously, but even if they wanted to, change to sort of more optimal behavior, it takes time. But how do you navigate that field of exactly these points that we're talking about?
So you want to find a co-author that will make some contribution to your paper. That's the way I would think about it, right? You don't need to split it equally, right? Equity is a concept that we created that primarily generates wars. Yeah, it would be nice to be equitable and have it all be equal, but that's not really the relevant thing. The question is, could they contribute something to make the paper better? Everybody at the end of the day is going to get 100% of the credit. It's going to be okay.
Right.
So the relevant thing is, can we do better work together than we can do it separately? I mean, the reason we hang out at universities together, the reason that we talk a lot to colleagues is because our work gets better, not necessarily because we like each other. I mean,
No, exactly.
we may also,
Yeah.
I mean, we do in this case. But we humans are better when we interact with other people. Like, it's really easy for me to fool myself. It's harder for me to fool you, and probably vice versa. So you look for a co-author who can make some contribution. Maybe the contribution is to do pretty much the same kind of thing that you can do, and you split it. Often they can do something that you can't do, or you can't do as well, or you don't want to do.
Right.
Or you know how to do, but no reason for you to do it again. It would be more valuable for them to do it.
Right.
And it would save you time, effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is excellent advice, and this is, I mean, I see collaboration as almost like a sport, right? You're trying to play a certain sport, football, you call it soccer in Europe. But the setup would be to find the right person for the right spot, right? You want a goalkeeper with those certain type of skills. You want an attacker, defender, and so on and so forth. And I think the big problem in academia, the difference to sports, is that everyone sees exactly what everyone else is doing momentarily. I mean, the game is 1 hour. We know performance, how well someone is doing, their cameras, and so on and so forth. In academia, everything more or less is hidden. So I think that creates certain problems for incentives, and then this sort of game of basically what Adam Grant wrote this book between takers and givers. So you have people that tend to take more, and you have people that tend to give more, and then you have people that sort of match. And I think most people are matchers. Basically, they're trying to find equality. You gave this amount of time and this amount of skills into this, and so therefore we're splitting the difference like so. So I'm hearing you say basically we should operate more like sort of a giver mentality, or is that right? I mean, basically,
empirically, if you asked most co-authors how much effort they contributed, or what percentage of effort they contributed, they would give answers that are higher than their co-authors would give about them.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? We all think our part was more important than everyone else thought it was, and vice versa.
Right.
So let's just remember that when we're having a conversation with our co-author.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a reason why they think the piece of the paper that they contributed to was essential.
Right.
You know what? It probably was essential. And it probably took more time than you think, because you weren't doing it all.
Right.
Right? So, the goal is the work. It's not, we want to make the discovery or write the paper or make the contribution in some way with the raw materials we have. Yeah. And we have our universities and the libraries and the computer systems and data and research subjects. And one of the raw materials we have is our collaborators. A friend of mine calls it a social prosthetic, as a way of conveying that you're using more than you have as part of your body.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it. So how do you remind people of that? Because that could be hard. I mean, it could be a point of conflict in collaborations in general. So I mean, and I guess your way of handling it has changed over time. I mean, when you were more of a junior researcher compared to now when you're a established researcher. So what strategies do you have for handling these types of conflicts, and how often do they actually happen in the collaborations that you have been engaged in?
I mean, I think you get better at it. It's not that I'm a senior researcher. It's that I've tried it a lot of times and screwed it up enough so that I think I know the rules now to make it really work efficiently.
Yeah. So give us your advice. What's
I think the best way to think about it is a piece of advice that not only applies to this, but pretty much applies to everything, and only partly tongue in cheek. It may be the meaning of life, which is pretty much, it's not about you. You know, whatever it is, whatever you're thinking about, it's not about you. You know, it's about the relationship, or it's about how the other person's thinking, or it's where the other person is, or it's about the work that you're trying to achieve. And if you're only thinking about yourself, about whether it's fair, whether other people are doing their share and things like that, that's just a recipe for having a big fight.
right?
It's not, and the big fight is not going to accomplish anything other than not getting the work done.
Right.
So understand where everybody is from their perspective as much as possible. You know, so it's like human relationships.
So has it happened? I'm super curious here. Well, basically, you know, you've been called up by your collaborator, and you know, Gary, this is this and that, and the people, you know, the person at the other side of the phone is sort of yelling at you, Gary. You haven't. Like, how do you handle that conversation? Practically,
it doesn't usually happen that way.
No, but I mean, you know, I'm trying. It's like a
yeah. I mean, there'll be some gentle nudge, like, "Hey, when are you going to get to this?" Right? And of course, I'm involved in this because I really want to do it. Like, I'm not going to do it unless I really want it. I'm not going to agree to sign up unless I think it would be so cool if we could prove the thing that we think that could be proven. We could find the evidence for the thing that we think might be there.
Right.
And if I want to do that, then I'm going to do it. It's true that I'm involved in other things and might not have prioritize that on the timeline in the order in which a co-author might want it. Right. But when I get to it, I'm going to put in more effort than they think. So that way they'll still talk to me.
so how many, and this is a hard problem. This is a hard question in the sense, if you would estimate, Gary, of all the collaborations, that the denominators, all collaborations Gary is involved himself in, and basically you would have failed collaborations and successful, and maybe somewhere in between. And you get a portion of how well you've done, you know, throughout the years.
Oh, I think this is related to doing scholarship. So in some sense, you could ask a parallel question, not at all the same question, which is, of all the hypotheses you tested, how many worked out as you expected?
Sure.
Right? It's a similar kind of thing.
It's a similar type of thing.
And I think the answer to both is that our job is not to take hypotheses or planned co-authorships from God or some exogenous choice and then try to fulfill it. In both cases, we're trying to match both. So for hypotheses, you know, we have an empirical claim and evidence, and we're trying to get them to align.
Right.
And it's true, given a claim, we can collect data in different ways. We can use different methods to try to validate the claim, but we can also change the claim. Right. We can also realize, you know, these data really are not very good for answering this question, but they can really answer a completely different question. Similarly with co-authors, right? It can turn out that I want to write, I'm really interested in writing. I think it would be so cool if we were to write a particular paper. Right. But I'm working with this other person, and that's just not what motivates them. Or they might they might be motivated by that question, but they just don't have anything to contribute to that particular paper.
Right.
So the trick is not to like persuade them or berate them into doing the thing that you want to do. Arguments, remember, pretty much never end arguments, right? Right. So what do you do? Well, the trick is to find an incentive compatible question that we both care about, and an incentive compatible outlet that we both want to achieve, or put our paper in, or whatever it is, and in a way that, in a time frame that we both are willing to go for it, and in a way that we're both going to do something, right? It's not any good for a co-author to have their name on so a lot of times people will write me and say, how about you put my name on, how about you put your name, that is my name, on their paper? And I say, I don't need any more lines on my CV. Nobody needs that. it's not interesting, it's not fun, it doesn't make a contribution. What you really want to do is figure out a way for your co-authors to make an important contribution so that you can also, right? You change both. You change both the question and how you answer it. Same thing in academia as in co-authorship, I think.
I see. So you're, I mean, summarizing what you're saying here, Gary, is that you handle these tensions. I wouldn't necessarily call them conflicts, but tensions between ideas and what to pursue by trying to find this, not necessarily even a middle ground, but finding maybe a higher ground of combination of ideas or methods or outlets, and thereby trying to steer through sort of this very messy landscape of different interests that are trying to align, but for different reasons might not be able to align in this sort of particular setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think changing the question, as you know, is something I emphasize in class a lot. Changing the question is every bit as important as figuring out how to answer a question. In fact, from kindergarten all the way up through somewhere in graduate school, the task is the instructor says, here's the question. It is fixed, immutable, unchangeable. You can't touch it, and then you have to answer it. Okay, in 11th grade, if you were given the exam and you crossed out the questions, you rewrote new questions, that wouldn't work very well.
That doesn't work well.
But as you're becoming an academic in graduate school and afterwards, by far and away, the best methodological advice in many situations is not to come up with a different method, a different data set, it's just change the question so that it aligns with the evidence you're able to provide. That's often the case, right?
In a way, it's evolving the question, right? I mean, changing sounds almost like cheating, but I like the word evolving because you're sort of saying, look, the original question we had might not have been the best question because of, X, Y, and Z. And so by evolving it, meaning, we sort of shifted the goal to some extent, but it's evolving based on what we know.
I agree. Evolving is good. People come to my office and they very often ask methodological questions. And, I like that. I get to understand new methodological problems, new substantive questions, new data sets, new concerns, new ways of thinking about the world. But often they come in with a methodological question or a substantive question it sounds like a question, but it's not really a question, right? And there's no answer to it, right? And if you look at it, 97% of making fun of it, 97% of the data is missing, and it's not clear whether the dependent variable is the thing on the left side or the right side. It's just like one big mess. And they're asking me for the button in SPSS that they could push to get rid of this thing that someone told them was endogeneity.
Right.
It's not going to happen. Okay. But if you look at and by the way, they're leaving tomorrow for Germany to go interview legislators, right? Tomorrow, right? And you have this data set and this question. It's just the whole thing is a mess, and it's often sort of like that. Okay, or from very, very, very good people. And so what the best methodological advice in those cases is not to answer the question posed to you. It's to change or evolve the question and to say, you know what, you can't really answer the question you gave me, which might have been justified. Often people will come in and they'll say, I have this theoretical question, and they'll explain to me this whole theoretical apparatus that justifies the question. And then they'll ask me the crazy methodological question to fix. And after we talk about it and think about it and work on it, it turns out that the best answer, the best advice I can give them is, you know what, answering that question is going to be really hard with the data you have. There is a way to do it, but it wouldn't involve going to Germany and interviewing legislators. It would probably involve going to New Jersey and hanging out with street people or doing completely different things. And that's not an option because they're going to Germany tomorrow, right? So the best thing to do often is to say, there's another question, a really interesting, important question that could really make a big difference in the field if you pursued that, and your data, the data you have and the data that you could gather, that you intend to gather, could answer that question. We don't know the answer to it. Everybody, I think, would want to know the answer to it. Why don't you go after that question? That's an evolved or changed question that I think would be much more valuable. And that's something that we never learned to do, right? From kindergarten up through graduate school.
Yeah,
but you're allowed to do it.
It's like teaching, basically.
What's that?
Basically cheating. It feels like when you're.
It's sort of cheating. That's right. But all of a sudden the rules have changed, and we're allowed to do that. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. I mean, as a researcher, that's one of the things we, we get basically paid for is to ask questions and ask different questions and keep on asking questions and try to answer those questions in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, actually, let me add one more thing, Adele. It sounds like it's cheating if it's generating a just so story for data you have. But if the data and the question really align with the changed question, then you're getting some evidence for it, then of course you follow good methodological advice and look for other observable implications of the same idea that are out of sample that make you vulnerable to being proven wrong. Collect those, show that you're actually not wrong, and that's very powerful.
I mean, it's part of the, I think this is also perhaps a little bit of a difference between the natural and the social sciences, that in the social sciences, you are able to change those or evolve those questions because social reality is kind of a messy. Whereas in the natural sciences, there are basically standing questions that are very hard to change because those are like what everyone is focusing on. So it sort of comes back to the idea of truth and basic structure of the world. Or is it like that, what you say?
I don't think so. I think they have the same issues in the natural sciences. I think they try to pursue one thing and they can't quite do it, but they can work their way around to learn about a different thing. I think this is very common in different fields. I'm not sure if it's more common it's often not done. It's the most valuable advice, and it's often not taken in our field and in others. But I think it's often the case that we have lots of theoretical ideas, like think of all the questions you would love to answer right now if you could, right? There's an enormous array of them, enormous array. And then you have a more limited array of possible data sets you could access in a feasible amount of time.
Right.
If you could match those, there's a lot of things that would satisfy you.
Right.
So that's undoubtedly true in the natural and physical sciences as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so how would are there questions that are so interesting and so deep that you aren't willing to compromise, but are very hard to answer with the data that you have? So you keep on trying to answer them. Is there any?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you think that the prize is big, the thing you would learn, the discovery you might make is big enough, and it's going to require you to spend a year or 5 years to collect the data, then you go do it. I mean, I've done projects like that. With Ben Schneer and Ariel White, they came to graduate school and they were in my office, and I'm talking to them about media studies, and nobody really had ever really done an experiment where you could really figure out what the effect of the media was, except by making lots of assumptions. There were lots of very creative studies to figure out what the effect of the media was. Like they put up a new television tower, and some people live behind the hill in the radio shadow, and some people get the TV signal. And you compare the two, and it's like a treatment and control group, right? But of course, if you live behind the hill in the radio shadow, you're less privileged. You're in an area that maybe is poorer and certainly politically less privileged. So it's not a random assignment between treatment and control. You really want to tell the New York Times or whatever outlet it is to randomly publish studies when we say. Now, they don't usually do that, right. But Ariel and Ben came to graduate school, and I thought that we might be able to do this, but it was going to take a long time. And I said, let's do this. Before you guys graduate, we will get there. And unfortunately, I missed by about 6 months, but you can see the paper that we published in Science.
That's fantastic.
Ben is now a professor at Harvard, and Ariel's now a professor at MIT. So I think it worked out okay.
Fantastic.
But yeah, sometimes it took 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes it takes a long time, and it's worth it. Right. We gathered together 48 different media outlets and convinced them to let us run this kind of experiment.
So this is hugely interesting, Gary. So basically, this is like a trade-off between your interest, the worthiness of the question to pursue, and how much resources you have to actually convince yourself to go down this path of following these sets of questions. So this brings me to another sort of topic, which is leadership in general, and leadership also in particular situations. So, yeah, I mean, if you think about, if you're a researcher building towards excellence, but you are maybe starting from scratch, right? So you might not be at the best institution, sort of okay, and maybe not having, the best sort of network of collaborators, but there is a sort of an aspiration towards excellence. And you think about, maybe there is a question like this that you want to pursue, a topic that you want to sort of build excellence in, or striving towards excellence. How would you think about that setup? What type of advice would you give to that person?
So it sounds like the first thing I should say is you can write your way out of anywhere. If you really need to leave and you don't have an offer from somewhere else and people don't quite know how good you really are, okay, let's also understand that you've been working pretty hard writing papers, and the papers have not yet been published, or they're just published, and other people don't. It's always going to be the case where you know that you're better than other people think you are, because you keep writing papers and they're not available yet.
Right.
So
so there's like a discrepancy between.
Yeah. So first of all, relax. It'll be okay. Keep working. Keep writing.
Keep writing.
But then the second thing is that you can do the work now. You can do research now. You can collaborate with people who are not there. The pandemic made the whole world use Zoom like we're using now. But you know what? As you well know, academics have been doing video conferencing for years, right? We've had collaborators. I still have collaborators who I've never met in person. A good number of collaborators.
Same here.
And that was a thing. I mean, now there's whole other sectors of the economy that we can talk to without having to find their phone number.
Right.
But we can do it. So no matter what institution you're at, if you don't have the resources or the collaborators, you can find them elsewhere. Academic departments, they cluster all the political scientists in one place, and they cluster all the physicists in another place, and that's because political scientists make more progress by talking to other political scientists.
Right.
But the fact is, still within political science or within economics or within each of these fields, they still try to have one of each, which is probably a mistake, right? Right. It's probably more valuable to have dense collections of people working on similar topics. The field, of course, is lots and lots of things, and a university or a department may feel responsible for representing them in some sense, but the optimal research strategy is not to have people doing things that are so disconnected that they might as well be in different parts of the world.
Right. So it will be, so what you're trying to indirectly say is that, I guess, that if you're in this sort of not a top institution, but you're aspiring, keep on writing, keep on doing your work, but also maybe find people in other disciplines that are working on similar topics that might be striving towards the same goal, type of thing, right?
So other disciplines at your institution, or the same subfield in your not department but discipline at other institutions. Right? So it's okay. You can still collaborate.
Right. And so this is sort of part of the leadership that we sort of both at the university level want to see established. Basically, everyone is striving, in most cases, striving towards becoming better, building better and stronger institutions. And I mean, you are the director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, and you've been sitting on that position for a while. So how do you, as a director, and this is sort of generally posed question, regardless of the institution that you are in, how do you make sure that the institute and the people around you keep on sort of becoming better?
So our theory is that the social sciences are one of the most exciting parts of the academic world in sort of this generation. What's really happening is that large pieces of the social sciences are being sort of ripped out of the humanities and put into the sciences. Not all of them. That shouldn't even happen to all of them. But big pieces that's what's happening. It used to be that we just studied things. We'd study this, and when we were done studying this really interesting topic, we'd study this. And then when we were done studying that topic, we'd study this.
There's a lot of jumping.
That's a little unfair characterization of what the humanities do, but in the sciences, they make discoveries. They learn about the world. They there's inventions, there's diseases cured, etc. I remember seeing in 1995 an article in Science magazine that asked a bunch of scientists, what's the future of your field the next 25 years? And then they asked a bunch of social scientists, what's the future of your field? The scientists had all these incredibly exciting things they made up, right? We're going to discover this, we're going to find this, we're going to cure this disease. So every single one of the smaller number of social scientists said, we're going to study this. And then it's going to be really exciting because we're going to study this. And then it's really exciting because we're going to study this. I'm sure it was really exciting and it was going to be really exciting, but that, like, what are we doing that for?
Yeah.
right? Fortunately, since 1995, as I actually got to write in Science magazine 20 years afterwards, like we've actually made lots and lots of progress. We've actually made lots of discoveries, lots of understandings about the way the empirical world works, lots of inventions of different methodological ways of analyzing data and new sources of data.
Right.
So all that I think I think that's just really important in the direction that the field's going.
So why is that, Gary? Why do you think the social sciences are like that, sort of just jumping between topics, not making discoveries or refraining from claiming about discovering?
Well, we didn't know how to do it originally. Right? We just didn't know. We didn't have the ability to collect the data. We didn't know the methods or how to develop the methods to analyze the data. We didn't have the theories to make sense of it. The social sciences are much more difficult than the sciences. In the 60s, political scientists would look at the data and say Congress is very partisan, and the elections are decided based on either close or far margins, but just based upon the partisan makeup of the districts. Incumbency didn't matter, et cetera. And then you get to the 80s and 90s, and incumbency advantages got much higher, and partisanship went away. The political cartoons were about how let's say Ford and Carter in 1976 were Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Right.
And now we're back to extreme partisanship. Right. So the stuff changes, right? When people take pictures of other planets, the planets don't get embarrassed and cover themselves up, and the astronomers don't have to go to the IRB to have permission to take pictures of them, right? Exactly. There aren't committees of mice that get together and decide whether they're allowed to be studied, right? It's actually very hard to do what we do. Right. But I think we figured out a lot of it. Yeah. We know how to go to those committees now. We know how to collect data in ways that people are willing, in certain circumstances, willing to give us, and in certain cases, very private information in honest ways.
Yeah, so that's part of it. And the other part is learning in general. I mean, staying Jor with the stuff that are happening, learning, but also perhaps unlearning certain things so that you sort of stay intellectually and creatively fresh.
But like unlearning what?
So unlearning would be, unlearning bad habits, perhaps, or unlearning, things that aren't true or don't have empirical sort of validity, but you've learned that it is like that. And I think that's sort of part of the difficulties, I guess, both in the sciences. Although logic prevails there, rationality is a virtue. But even more so, obviously, outside in society, people rarely change parties, or they have their ideas of whatever is truth. And so your general strategy of learning, but perhaps also unlearning, you have sort of a specific way of doing that.
I mean, I like to look for papers that are in a sequence, so that one's better than the next in the same area, where you finally get the hang of what's going on. But then I really like to pick topics that I don't know that much about and go into them. I like having the tools that I have learned and developed, because you get a seat at different tables in really interesting ways. Right. People who you don't know anything about this, you don't know very much about the substance, but they still want you at the table. So that's, and to me, that's really fascinating and interesting and fun. And if there's a way to actually work on it enough so you could get and do a piece of research, perhaps write a paper on it. Like, what a great thing. I mean, isn't that why we got involved in academia in the first place, right? To learn new things.
And so what are you like currently working on or learning, if you say, like, so basically learning as a general project, often you get the advice to learn new things that are very adjacent or in line with, whatever project that you are working on, which is, I think, a fine advice, because it sort of aligns your time in a nice way, but it might not be the thing that you need to be studying necessarily. So an example would be that you're working, take that project about endogeneity. You might be, studying what, is happening in Germany, but you should be really studying statistics. But you don't have sort of time for that, so that you aren't spending time learning that. You're learning more about the field specifically in Germany. That's just an example. But how do you deal with that sort of general learning agenda versus specific learning for projects?
Well, so you're not, when you say you mean one, I think.
One, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I think you have to make an incentive compatible for yourself. I mean, this field requires a lot of effort, right? Like there's a lot of time and a lot of figuring stuff out and knocking your head against the wall conceptually. And so it might be good for somebody who wanted to go interview legislators in Germany to not go and to take 3 years of statistics.
Right.
But probably not an option. Probably that person is not going to do that, doesn't want to do that, has not devoted themselves to this field to do that.
Right.
And I think that's fine. But then let's change the question to something they can answer with their skills, something that will be important, something that will be worthy of their time, rather than going to somebody, to the statistician that they might have taken their courses and say, can you just tell me what to run so that I don't have to think about it and people won't criticize me? It's never gonna. That's not what you want to be doing, right? So just make it incentive compatible.
Interesting, and that's. Learning is part of acquiring new skills, and I guess it's also a gateway to creativity in general, combining different elements of ideas that exist in different disciplines or between different theories and so on. And like, is there sort of a specific formula that you have for generating new ideas that you would like to share with us?
So, of course, it's not a formula, as you know by the way that you phrased the question.
Yeah.
But I like to learn about lots of different areas, and that is actually very helpful for the areas that you originally began with, and vice versa.
Right.
People have different ways of pursuing analysis, data analysis, and theories in different fields or different subfields, and understanding that a lot of that is just sort of custom and convention. But understanding what's core in those fields and what might be useful to take from one field and put it into another field, that's really, really helpful in understanding not only what methods are used, but what's an important question, right? What's an important question it's essentially a political choice. I don't mean Democrat or Republican or anything like that, but I mean it is not constrained by science, really. It's whatever it is, a bunch of human beings decide is important. And in different areas, they have come to different conclusions about that, phrased in different ways that motivate people. So understanding that is very helpful as well, right? That can help you pick questions that your field might not have ever really thought of, right? I've told this story before, but I remember being in graduate school on my general exams, and the general exams at the University of Wisconsin were in person. And I remember watching the night before a telethon, a Jerry Lewis telethon, right? This was some time ago. And if you remember this, they have this 24-hour thing where they'd stay up late and they'd get people to donate for muscular dystrophy or some disease. And, I realized that there's an enormous amount of public effort being put in to cure muscular dystrophy. So I walked into my general exam and I said, how come there's no telethon for political science? And they said, they thought I was being, flip and,
funny,
and, stupid and disrespectful. They thought I was being disrespectful. And I was being disrespectful, not of them, of course. I was being disrespectful of the field, right? Because like, think of the answer to the question they gave me, which was, well, that the telethon's for important issues. So then, which one of them did say that. And I said, okay, so why are you devoting your life to this? Like, why don't we just go figure out what most
did you ask that, or was
I did ask that. I did. I didn't think about it. Like, what's the point? Like, either it's important or it's not important. And I don't think we should have a telethon for solving the problem of partisan identification, but if what you are doing is not important, if you can't explain why it is important, then don't do it, right? Like, what's the point of doing it, right?
I guess it could be hard, especially if you're starting off your career, even mid-career through where you sort of working hard late night, you're doing all this work and it takes forever to get things published, and it's just like it's like Sisyphus work. You're just throwing up this big stone and it keeps on rolling back, and sometimes it's hard to sort of motivate oneself given that situation. Success can come sort of at a later stage. So how do you respond to that?
So if you think the journals are taking too long to evaluate your paper, first of all, you're right, just so you know. That doesn't matter. Being right doesn't actually count, count for anything. What you do is just write more papers, right? Like don't just finish a paper, send it out, and wait.
Right.
Go write another paper. So what that will mean is you'll have 4 or 5 papers, however many, under review at the same time. They'll all take too long.
Yeah.
And then when they all come back in, on average, they will have taken as much time as short a time as you will have wanted. So that's not a great, really it is just save the thought so that one day maybe you'll choose to be an editor of a journal and you'll fix the problem.
Interesting. Well, there are certain suggestions of how to do that, but actually this question of productivity brings me to the next question, which is sort of, or maybe a topic in general, which is sort of micro strategies. That we are a bit running short on time here, but just in general, so how does Gary King sort of organize his a typical day or a typical week, a typical month to get that productivity up? Because all these things that we're talking about are sort of general principles of sort of worthy of pursuing, but in the end of the day, you have to translate it down to those sort of chunks of hours that you have throughout the day. How does Gary King do that?
So I think co-authors and collaborators come first. So if they're stuck on something and you are skiing, you stop skiing for 5 minutes and get them unstuck, and then keep going. Like, they have to come first, or you've set aside 3 hours in the morning to write, and you've cleared the decks, and one of your co-authors is stuck on something, your students is stuck on something or something, doesn't matter, they come first. It's pretty much always the case when you have an employee also. Collaborator is not an employee, of course.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. It's like they have to come first. It's frustrating, it can be annoying, but you're much more productive if you can get them working without asking questions after they're unstuck and you're working. So that's like probably the first principle. It has to work for you. So some people really like to have personal time where there's no work involved at all. No work comes home, all the work's in the office. Yeah. And then there's work time where there's no personal connections. Yeah. For me, I think life is life, and it doesn't really work that way. Yeah. Graduate students tend to work late into the night, and older faculty tend not to do that, and so it's just not. I have a great personal life that is not the immediate subject of this this conversation. Yeah. But if I can take 5 minutes and answer a question, it's absolutely worth doing. So.
Yeah. So essentially, the micro strategies that are boiling down, Gary, is it's like a fluent. It's not like a chunk, where now I'm checking in, I'm working on this, checking out. It's more of a fluent type of setup, right?
Yeah, it's often the case that you think, I'm going to work on this project today, but you realize there's something missing. Right? Like yesterday, I was going to write this thing, okay, and I realized there was this little piece missing, and I was waiting for somebody to tell me it, and they hadn't actually produced the answer, and they're still working. And that meant I couldn't, I was stuck, which is fine.
Yeah.
I have enough projects so I can go do something else that I would find interesting and motivating and fun and exciting. And so I go do that.
Interesting. Yeah. But do you have a set sort of rough ideas for how many hours you want to put in a typical day? I mean, the thing plus minus, give 1 hour here, 1 hour there. I mean, my setup is basically just to give you a sense. I mean, I try to work 6 efficient hours. I try to 6 efficient, meaning that without disruption, it should fit in there. I mean, even sort of meetings go into that are sort of qualified as work, and I try to sort of have that set up. But that might, that doesn't work for everyone. So I'm just curious of how do you do it?
Yeah, I don't think about it that way. I don't really count up the number of hours. It's okay with me if I don't work, some days, or if I'm working all the time, day and night on other days. You're really just trying to accomplish a lot of goals. Like, I want to keep my family happy. I want to be happy with them.
Exactly.
I want to spend, all that is absolutely important. You don't need more. I mean, I don't need more lines on my CV, but I really want to be involved in some of these projects, because there's stuff that we can learn about the world that isn't going to be learned otherwise, or it might take much longer, or I wouldn't get to be part of it. So yeah, you wake up and you say, I really want to do that. So it depends. I mean, I think that's the answer.
Fair enough. So basically, ending questions here, Gary, in terms of you've accomplished a lot as we know, and that your CV shows and your publications shows, and the impact that you have on the field show that in many different ways. So, are there any goals that you haven't achieved that you wanna pursue yet?
Oh, the next paper. I have a number of papers that I'm working on right now that I absolutely want to figure out the answer to.
Okay.
And if I do, I'll let you know. I'll send you a copy.
Please do.
That's actually what it is. I mean, there's so much more stuff that we could learn if we had enough time and all the right confluence of forces. That's what I want to accomplish now.
And that's interesting. And many people in your position, Gary, would just say basically, I'm going to relax a little bit more. I mean, human life is limited, right? Unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you see it. But and they just basically say, now I want to, I'm more senior, I'm fine, I want to relax. But there's something that keeps pushing you, and it seems like this knowing more about this curiosity. Finding out about certain things. Is that sort of what motivates you, Gary? What is?
Yeah, I mean, I can relax also, but it's not as much fun, right? It's not as much fun as learning something for the first time that no one else in the history of the world has ever known before, and explaining it to others and letting them understand that. So I'm not really interested in hanging out and relaxing that much, although sometimes, of course, it is essential because we are, fortunately or unfortunately, humans.
Yeah.
So you absolutely need that.
But it also sounds like you actually, you are writing. Many seniors, established researchers, they have students or collaborators working for them. But it sounds like you are actually, writing a bunch of those papers. Yeah, you're leading them. You're doing the analysis. You're sitting in R, doing it. Is that right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have different expertise, and everybody brings different things to the project, of course. But we try to get involved. I try to get involved in all the parts of the project. Yeah, just like they do.
So what do you think your legacy will be, Gary, and what do you wish it to be?
I wish it was not a legacy yet. Okay.
you'll live for many more years. But if you could basically,
I mean, the most important thing we do, I think, is to train students and to learn from them and learn with them. It's completely two-way. I think, I wrote in a paper I wrote about education once, teaching teaches the teacher. The feeling that if you explain something to someone else, they might understand it, but you definitely understand it better, right? And so you want to put them in the position of being a teacher and getting them to explain things to you, and then you might learn something, and they might learn something even better. And most of the things that I write are actually not just written in general, although they are also written in general. They're for my students, right? I bring many of them into class, and then I learn things from class and go out and study other things. And hopefully, some of the students get trained and become collaborators, and we work on other things together. So I hope this project of science in the social sciences continues and gets better and with more dense connections and makes faster and faster progress.
Right. That's a great point. And last question, which you get to ask, but not to me, but to others in the audience that will see this eventually. What do you want them to think about when they see this conversation with you, Gary?
Oh, tell me what the next cool thing is. Tell me what the thing is that you want to know. Tell me what the thing is that social science could learn about the world to make it a better place, to make us all live longer, healthier, happier lives, to improve society. Tell me what those questions are, what the theories we would need to understand, and the data sets that we would need to learn how to collect, and then the methods that we would need to analyze them. Tell me what those are, okay? Or go write the paper yourself and send me a copy.
That's a fantastic question, Gary. I'll take that with me, and I hope that the audience will take that with them as well. So many thanks for this session, Gary, and hopefully in the future we'll have another one. We talk about another set of questions. We'll actually have another one on entrepreneurship. But for now, I thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks very much. Take care, everybody.